Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to yet another one of our fantastic DigiPride panel talks from Gayming Magazine. My name is Robin Gray. I'm the founder of Gayming Magazine. And as I say, this is one of our fantastic DigiPride talks. DigiPride from Gayming Magazine is on for 3 months because Pride is not just for June. You can find out everything that we're doing by heading over to gaymingmag.com/DigiPride. We've got competitions, we've got panels, we've got streams, we've got loads of fantastic things, both here and at gaymingmagazine.com. Today's talk is by the fantastic Sacha Coward. Sacha Coward. I haven't been drinking, honestly. And he's going to be presenting to us Space Invaders, a queer video game history. Sacha, welcome. How are you?
I'm really good. Really excited to be here. This is going to be a really fun thing to talk about.
Excellent. I'm really excited to get cracking. Just a quick bit of housekeeping. This is a live show, but Sacha is going to talk straight for 45 to 50 minutes. Hopefully we'll all learn something. Please, if you have any questions, drop them into the chat. I'm going to sit here in the background harvesting all those questions up. And then at the end of Sacha's talk, I will make an appearance and pose some of those questions to Sacha to try and get a wrap up. But yes, in that case, I'm going to press the button and I'm going to bring your talk on screen now. And there we go. And I'm going to step out and I'm going to leave you to it. Everyone, Sacha Coward.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone out there in the nexus of the internet. So my name is Sacha. My pronouns are he, him. And this is always a very strange experience for me because I'm staring into a webcam right now. And normally I am a historian. I work in museums, so I'm used to talking to actual people and doing tours in person. So this is always bizarre, but it is wonderful to be able to talk about the stuff that I love. So today is going to be about 45 to 50 minutes, and the goal is to talk through some of, not all of, the queer history of video games. Now, I can guarantee that if you're into video games and you're into the representation of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people in video games, I will definitely hit some of the examples you're thinking of, but I cannot guarantee that I will hit every single one. And I actually encourage you in the chat to share some examples I miss out, some of your favorite examples. But I'm not just here to give you a kind of snapshot of the history of queerness in video games. I'm also going to be trying to justify to you why it's really important, why someone like me, a historian, someone that works in a dusty old museum a lot of the time, thinks this is really valuable, why I think video games should be treated as importantly as artworks, as paintings or things you might see in a cabinet. And at the end, I'm going to do some musings on where we might be going next, particularly from the perspective of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and queer people. What's the future going to be like for video games? What could we do better? Now, we're going to be covering a lot of stuff, but first of all, it is important. I know it's really boring to have to define a word, but the word queer is itself a tricky one. So before we get into this, let's just talk it through. So queer is a word that I will use a lot. You're going to get sick to death of hearing it. I'm going to use it pretty much every single slide. Now, in the past, and actually in my past, the word queer was largely used as an insult. So when I was at school, queer was something that was thrown at me. I'm a cisgender gay man. My pronouns are he, him. But it was something that you would hear as an insult, something that would put people down. But since around the 70s, queer's got this other meaning. It's been reclaimed by our community, or some members of our community, to be a political term, something that means that we can all come together. Some people find like all the letters in the LGBTQIA+ acronym difficult. And one of the things that queerness, or being queer, offers is possibly an umbrella term that we can all gather underneath. Now, not everyone likes that word, and if you don't like it, then don't use it. You know, if you're not comfortable saying it, please don't. But when I use the word queer, when I talk about myself being queer, I'm using it in that reclaim sense. So I'm trying to talk about it in a positive way. Now, this talk is called Space Invaders. I mean, I couldn't help but throw in a few nerdy references. I am a gamer. I love video games. But Space Invaders, particularly because it is a nice retro game, but also because being queer, being LGBTQ+ in video games, playing them, making them, working with them, you can feel a bit like you're taking up space and sometimes you're not always wanted. So let's get on with the first slide, which is my narcissism slide. And I promise this is the last bit where I'll be talking just about me. But who am I? Well, my name is Sacha. If you want to stalk me on Twitter, it is at Sacha Coward. That is my real name. It's a stupid name, but you can bring it up with my parents. Now, in my real normal life, I am a tour guide. I am a historian. I'm also an escape room designer. So I have been building physical escape rooms for about 4 years now, and it's something I'm really into. And it all comes back to a love of video games. So in those pictures, you can see the weird alien thing that was made out of cardboard by me. That's an escape room I did for the Victoria and Albert Museum. And then in the middle, you may spot that I am dressed as a wannabe Pokemon trainer, Milo, if you've played it. Not my favorite game, but I did like the outfit. So I did a tour of the British Museum all about video games. Now, if you like this talk and you're interested and you want to hear more kind of stuff of me blabbering on at you, you can also go and have a look at the Museum of London, where I've made a virtual video game themed tour of their collection. Now, you're sick to death of hearing about me. Let's get on with the content. Let's talk about actual video games. Now, I'm presuming if you're on Twitch and you're watching this, you're probably a gamer. You're probably into games. So maybe I am preaching to the choir, but still, even gamers themselves may not appreciate that gaming and video games are an art form. Now, that isn't a question. That isn't rhetorical. I'm stating that as fact. Now, video games are in their infancy. They're in their adolescence. I mean, they've only been around for maybe 40, arguably 50 years, depending on what you define a video game as. So not as long as paintings, not as long as artworks or fashion or photography. But museums collect video games. The British Museum has a collection of video games. Pretty much most big museums you can think of, they have a collection of physical video games. And the reason for this is that the people that create games are obviously putting hours, years, lifetimes into the games that they are building. They are spending so much time creating these artworks. And also the people that play those games are creating artwork through playing them. So this, of course, is a picture of Minecraft that you can see. And there's probably better examples. People have built computers that function within the world of Minecraft. But I love this because it's a painting, the Mona Lisa, probably the archetypical artwork when you think of a painting, recreated pixel by players in Minecraft, obviously with the ring of Lord of the Rings in the top right corner. People are throwing in their lives to create artwork, to experience it and partake in it. So we need to stop thinking about video games as being the annoying thing that teenage boys play. That is so old school. That is so over with. And also as a distraction or as just a simple form of entertainment up there with any form of artwork. So now we've got that out of the way. Let's talk a bit more about why you should care about representation in video games, because I'm going to be talking about a particular group of people, LGBTQ plus people, in video games and why that is important. So I want to do a quote first from a book called Reality is Broken by a video game developer, Jay McGonigal. Now, I'm not being paid to endorse her book, but it is a stonking good read. But the quote said that gamers have had enough of reality. They are abandoning it in droves, a few hours here, an entire weekend there, sometimes every spare minute of every day for stretches at a time, in favor of simulated environments and online games. Maybe you are one of these gamers. If not, then you definitely know some of them. So people are playing games at an incredibly high rate. They are spending so many time, like basically if you added all the time people are playing video games, we're getting into thousands and millions of years worth of human life being spent just playing video games. And who are gamers? Well, the stereotypical image is still that Simpsons comic book dude, right? It's the kind of overweight, white, ponytail, still living with his mum. This is not what gamers look like. Gamers look like every person, every form and shape and type. And so if we look at who are playing games nowadays, it is still 54% of men and 46% of women, but we are getting close to that 50-50 slot. Now, apologies for the binary there. That's kind of how video games assess their sales between men and women, and we'll get into that a bit more later. Also, who are the people playing the most video games? Well, men between the ages of 21 and 35, I fall into that demographic. We are still apparently leading in terms of the people playing it, but the next two groups of people are both groups of women between 21 and 35 and older women between the ages of 36 and 50. Now, to those of you who are not converted to video games, so you're probably a minority in this conversation, but I see you. Video games matter. Whether or not you like them, they bloody matter. So if you look back in 2001, the entire music industry, the entire film industry, and the entire video game industry are making around the same kind of money. The same kinds of amounts of money are being raked in. By 2021, though, we are seeing the video game industry is bigger than the film industry and the music industry added together and times by 3. The video game industry is huge. It matters. Loads of people are playing it, particularly young people are playing video games, and it is affecting and influencing how they think about the world. So we're going to start doing our little taster trip through history. Now, our queer history of video games starts back in 1986. Now, there were video games before this, but most of these games were very, very simple in terms of graphic and storyline. So there wasn't really much space for gender or sexual identity. You were normally basically a pixel navigating a screen, and the games largely, not entirely, but largely were very simple. We're talking about Pong. We're talking about getting from A to B, shooting things in the way. There wasn't necessarily a complex identity. But by 1986, arguably, this is the very first representation of a queer person in a video game. It's a game called Moon Mist. Now, Moon Mist was kind of a bit like a choose your own adventure. So there weren't graphics. You actually had to just type into an interface basically what you want to do next. Do you want to go left or right? Do you want to eat a sandwich or do you want a glass of water? And you type it in and then it will progress the story. Now, one of the characters you come across is called Vivian Pentreath. Now, you are trying to find out who has killed a man, and this man is basically murdered by a woman called Vivian Pentreath. It turns out, spoilers, that she is a lesbian. And the reason that she has murdered the man and killed this guy called Jack is because she was actually in love with his girlfriend. Vivian Pentreath being such a wonderfully stereotypical dark arch lesbian name. I kind of love it. Drag queens out there, just go for it. But the kind of character we see here is pretty classic. We have the queer person as a villain, as the baddie, twisted, bit evil. Also, their love is painful and damaging and twisted, right? It's dark. In the end of this game, you are encouraged to kill Vivian. That's how you succeed, by murdering Vivian before she can kill you. So she's not exactly a really positive, powerful role model, but in some ways, I'm still pleased that she existed. We're going to jump to 1988. So we're going into Super Mario World, and we're looking at Birdo. Now, this is the classic queer archetype. If you look at a BuzzFeed article about queerness in video games, Birdo will be the one that will pop up first. So Birdo, in the original manual that came with the game, is described thusly. He thinks he is a girl and he spits eggs out from his mouth. He'd rather be called Birdetta. Now, this kind of implies that Birdo or Birdetta is trans, or at least they are not cisgender. They are not, the gender they were assigned at birth is not the gender that they want to be or be described as. Now, this is where we come to a weird stage. I'm talking about a pink dinosaur, and I'm asking you to seriously consider the pink dinosaur's gender identity. If you find that ridiculous, then you are correct. It is ridiculous, and yet I would still argue it is important, because this representation, which is aimed at kids, is clearly meant as a joke. This is a joke character. This identity is not being taken seriously. They're an enemy that you're trying to kill in the original game, and so the idea is this is part of making them ridiculous with their bow on their head. It is parodying them as a character. Now, Birdo has appeared in many other games in the Super Mario franchise since. The whole backstory of Birdo possibly being assigned male at birth has been removed from the storyline by Nintendo. And we'll come back to Nintendo later. We're not done with you. Now, the manual text was actually changed and updated. So this text you see here was removed. And in kind of European English editions, there was no reference whatsoever to Birdo being anything other than female, being a cisgender female character. So the trans story, the non-binary story was removed, even though it was just basically done as an offensive joke. Do things get better? Well, we've got a little blob of positivity for you. So in 1989, a game was released called Caper in the Castro. Now, this was produced by a woman called CM. Now, the really cool thing, if you want to go off and look up online on your browser, you can actually play Caper in the Castro for free now, because you can actually power it directly through your browser. If you search Caper in the Castro LGBT archive, you can find it online and give it a go. It is a murder mystery, but with a twist, because it was produced by a lesbian woman. And so it's entirely set in San Francisco, in an area called the Castro, which is basically an area which is famous for having a lot of gay bars, for being an area very popular with the LGBTQ plus community since roughly the 50s and 60s, but is most famously in the 70s and 80s. And so in this game, all the characters are queer, the in-jokes are queer. The main character is called Tracker McDyke. She is trying to find out who murdered her best friend, who was a drag queen. Now, this game was given out, and those who bought it were largely part of the LGBTQ plus community in America, and they were encouraged to donate money to an HIV charity, which I think is beautiful. This game was produced by a queer person for the queer community to help the queer community. Now, it was a very well-produced game. The graphics were great. The storyline was sharp. And so it was taken on by a developer who basically went to CM. CM was working in Silicon Valley at this point and just creating this game in her spare time. And she was asked whether she could produce this game for a mass market. But the only way of doing this was to remove every single queer reference. Caper in the Castro became Murder on Main Street. And Murder on Main Street had absolutely no LGBTQ plus narrative whatsoever, despite using the same basic assets. So this is kind of good and bad here. An amazing thing produced by a queer person, but it had to be sanitized and reduced down for a straight cisgender audience. This little bit of a trigger warning here for my trans and non-binary viewers. This is a bit upsetting, if I'm honest. It may be a video game character, and again, that may seem ridiculous, but I can understand why this is upsetting to hear. This is from Final Fight, which would later become the Street Fighter series, or a fighting game series. Now, when this was first produced in 1991, there was a character introduced known as Poison. Now, Poison was introduced as a female character, as a woman, and basically one of the characters that you could attack, one of the baddies. When this was localized to America and also to Europe, there was a big outcry, because the worrying thing was, were they encouraging gamers to beat up women? What about violence against women? Was this encouraging this amongst vulnerable young men playing this game? There were two different responses to this. Now, Nintendo, in their localized version, they changed and reskinned Poison and basically made them into like into a male character. They reskinned them, called them Billy, gave them green hair, and that was how they dealt with this situation. But Sega, they did not do that. Instead, they just changed the backstory to Poison and made Poison a transgender woman. And in doing so, they claimed that this was no longer violence against women, because this was, in fact, a transgender woman. And so it was okay to beat her up in a video game, which is really upsetting. I mean, it's deeply problematic. That's clearly something that is a problem. And even in the game, when it's described, the term used in Japanese roughly translates as new half, which is a derogatory Japanese term, which is equivalent to certain slurs that are used against trans women today. Now, Poison has actually kept her backstory. So in more recent games, she is still a trans woman. She still has this story. And some might argue that this has become an empowering character, that she still retains it, hasn't been retroactively removed like in some other games. But other people have argued that she is still this hyper-sexualized character. The way she's depicted is not exactly flattering, and it's still part of this really problematic backstory. So that's a kind of mixed one. Now, if there are trans people who want to reclaim this character, I would buy her today. Awesome. Go for it. Take it. Do it. But I can understand why people may not be happy with how that was done. So moving on to 1994. if I'm honest, I think this is beautiful because this is a Nintendo game. So this is Mother 2, which was known as Earthbound in Japan. And this game is a kind of role-playing game produced by Nintendo. And I just want to read this quote by Shigesato Itoi, who was one of the designers of the game. There's a gay person in Mother 2, a really passionate friend who lives in an England-like place. I designed him to be a gay child. In a normal real-life society, there are gay children, and I have many gay friends as well. So I thought it would be nice to add one in the game too. Now, I think this is amazing because this is coming from Nintendo. We'll be coming back to Nintendo. They do not have a good record when it comes to representation. I love Nintendo games. I adore them, but representation is pretty poor. But even in 1994, someone was including not just a gay person, but a gay child. Pretty controversial for a company like Nintendo. Now, it could be argued that at no point does the character is known as Tony, ever say that they are gay. The reason that you might read that they are gay is because they are very into you, the main character. They're a bit flirtatious. They kind of keep saying how much they're into you. So in a sense, there is a sense that they are portraying gay men as being a bit creepy, as being your friend that's a little bit too intense. So not entirely positive, but I would still generally give a thumbs up to Shigesato because this is kind of huge for 1994. And then moving on to 1997. So again, we're going slowly forward in time. We're coming on to Final Fantasy. Now, I'll admit that I am a Zelda boy myself, but I have played a fair bit of Final Fantasy in my time, and I know that some of my friends adore Final Fantasy. Now, Final Fantasy being a franchise that is set in loads of different worlds and storylines, but one in particular, Final Fantasy VII, involving the character of Cloud. In the original game, there are two scenes I want to point out, one of which is where you basically cross-dress, and you have to convince basically this really greasy brothel owner that you are the most attractive, and depending on things that you do, you can sort of win his favor by dressing up as a girl. In another scene, you compete with a bunch of bodybuilders, and the way they are depicted, if you've ever heard of Jono Finland, who is kind of an erotic gay artist, it's clearly using that style of the mustache and the muscles and the tight tops. It's very obviously queer coded, even with the sort of rainbow bright colors in the background. It's never explicitly said so. And Cloud is not a transgender character, at least not explicitly so, but it is playing with those ideas of gender and sexuality, making a nod generally for the sake of comedy. In the most recent updated version that's been released last year of Final Fantasy VII, we see Cloud again doing the cross-dressing routine. We do see the bodybuilders flexing and posing again. It's a bit more positive though, because in this scene you have this sort of bisexual, gender-bending cabaret host who sings a whole song basically about the fluidity of gender, which I thought was wicked and really good fun. And I know a number of my friends, maybe some of them even listening, have played this game in their youth. And even though it wasn't the best representation, they enjoyed it because they felt like there was going on for queer people, that at least this was something they could look back on and remember fondly. In 1999, so we're jumping to my favorite franchise, which is The Legend of Zelda. I adore Zelda. It is fantastic. Its representation of queer people, it's rubbish. I'm just going to speak personally. I think it is absolutely rubbish. But in the Ocarina of Time, arguably the best Zelda game ever, but I'm sure I'll have caused some beef in the chat for saying that. There is the character of Princess Zelda, of course, which the series takes its name from. And she is an interesting character. She's clever and bright, but she is a bit of a princess in the tower. She gets kidnapped and taken away. Except there's this cool twist. When you grow up, you meet her alter ego, her identity of Sheik. Now, Sheik is a ninja character who has a bound chest, who is kind of androgynous in terms of pronouns. The way people refer to Sheik is a bit ambiguous. They're kick-ass. They can like throw throwing stars, disappear, do backflips. Really cool. And it's really awesome that this turns out to be an identity within Zelda. And so for a long time, non-binary, trans people, gender fluid people were like, this is awesome. Particularly transgender men as well were like, look at this bounded, awesome hero. And then, of course, this is an example when Nintendo, rather than doing more, should have done less. responding to this excitement, they came out and said the definitive answer is that Sheik is a woman, simply Zelda in a different outfit. And it just kind of reduces down. It shows a low level of understanding about what Sheik could be. You don't need to say it. People were already claiming Sheik as being this awesome character. And by saying this, you're basically saying it's just, you know, Zelda throwing some clothes on. She's still just a Zelda and a princess. And it reduces the coolness of what that character could be in some people's imagination. So we're now coming up close to the 2000s, and this was an important video game experience for me. The Sims, the original Sims game produced by Maxis in 1999. This is a game where you basically control a whole family, a whole group of people. You can get them jobs, you can get them to fall in love, you can drown them in swimming pools and set them on fire. Maybe you didn't do that. If you were a teenager, you did that, because we all did, because we were all twisted. But something else I did as a teenager, who wasn't even really sure that he was gay yet, is I kept making families with two men, and they would get married and they would have a baby. And I just kept doing this. I kept playing this out. Some part of me was experimenting with this, and The Sims let me do that. Even cooler than this, marriage between two people of the same gender was able to happen in The Sims before it was legal in either the UK or America, two of the places that were largely playing this game, and definitely in and other places around the world. There was not legal same-sex marriage in the real world when you could do it in the game. You could even adopt a child. So this created this really cool space for those queer teenagers that grew up like myself playing this game to experiment, to play with these families and these relationships that we weren't necessarily even having yet. We didn't even have the confidence to have yet. Jumping on a few years to 2003, I want to talk about the Knights of the Old Republic and a particular character called Juhani. Now, if you are a Star Wars fan, this is really cool, because this is the very first canon, explicitly written queer character. So Juhani is a lesbian in the game, and this is before any of the films that have only been made a few years ago, where you sort of get a blurry kiss somewhere in the background. Now, this was a character who directly will romance you if you choose to be a woman, if you assign your gender of your avatar, the character you play, as being a woman. But if you are a man, she will not. So she is a lesbian. She is only attracted to you if you yourself are a woman. Now, there's an interesting thing here, looking at the coding at the bottom. As a historian, I have to often argue about whether people in history can be defined as queer or not. I have many a discussion with people about whether that is an acceptable thing to do. But with a video game, you can go to the code and you can say, this character, I can show you, they are coded to interact in this way. Their sexual identity or gender identity can actually be coded into them. But there is a dark side. If you look at the window, it says DLG editor. The reason being that this is someone who has hacked into the game and is rewriting the code of the character Juhani so that she can be romanced by someone of any gender. So basically writing out the sexuality that was written into this character, which is really sinister. It is worrying that a small percentage of gamers were so annoyed that they could not romance this lesbian character that they rewrote her so that you could. And this is something that does come up, sadly, as we go forward. About a game where you get to choose your character, you get to create your destiny. That is the game of Fable. So in 2004, the game of Fable, where you basically get to grow up, create a life. You can be good, you can be bad, you can get married, you can kill monsters, you can do all kinds of stuff. It's one of like the archetypical original role-playing games, which puts you at the center. Now, obviously, this is a way back, so choices in pretty much any decision you can make in the game are limited to a certain degree. It's kind of good, bad, married, not married. And they had an interesting thing around sexuality, whereby if you made yourself one gender, if you romanced the character of the opposite gender, your sexuality would say heterosexual. If you romanced the character of the same gender, it would say homosexual or gay. If you romanced the character of the same gender and then a character of the opposite gender, it would say bisexual, and then it would stay that way for the rest of the game. Here's the issue. I can see what they were trying to do there. But as a gay man myself, when I was younger, I had a girlfriend for like a few weeks. A number of queer people will experiment with different sexual identities before they come to understand who they want to be and how they want to identify. And many people's identities will change throughout life. Whereas in Fable, you are bisexual now. You don't get to then redefine as gay. You are stuck because you once had a sexual relationship with two particular people. That is now who you are. At the same time, they were trying. At least they gave 3 options. Many games gave 0 options, and you were presumed to be heterosexual. Although, in terms of gender identity, there is no transition, there is no gender fluidity yet in these kind of games. We are jumping forward a fair bit forward. So this is a bit where I've probably skipped out some examples of games, and I'd love to hear which ones really resonated for you. But I feel like for me, this is a big one, right? And yeah, we're going to be coming to the sequel later, because this has been a really interesting, a powerful moment, a controversial moment, and a difficult moment for the gaming industry, starting with The Last of Us, the original game, which is a zombie apocalypse game. I adore this game, really loved it when it came out, blew my mind. And it has one of the protagonists, one of the lead characters of Ellie, who is a lesbian. She is gay. She explicitly says so. There's a great scene where she's actually reading some gay pornography, and she basically says like, oh no, I'm not into this, and throws it out the window, which is really funny. But then in the DLC, you actually see her kiss a girl, her girlfriend, Riley. You also have the other character of Bill. Now, there is an optional content with Bill where you meet him. He's a bit of a bastard, if I'm honest. He's not the greatest of characters. But when you meet him, you can basically go off and you find his partner who has hung himself and left a letter for him. It's not exactly a lovely romance, but it shows that Bill is either gay or bisexual. Now, this is a game that you would not necessarily expect to have this kind of representation of apocalyptic, hyper-violent, hyper-gritty, brutal, violent, and beautiful, but really, really harsh gameplay, which is in a world covered in zombies, even if they are mushroom zombies, with queer characters center stage, was kind of huge and amazing. And we'll reflect on some of the responses to this later, but it was a real game changer, pun intended. We're now moving on to talk about Dragon Age Resistance. So Dragon Age is another role-playing game. So this is a year later. And we get 2 characters in here, which are really interesting. The character of Krem. So in this fantasy world, Krem is a really amazing fighter. He can join your party. He can set you missions. You can do things for him. You can get to know him. And if you get to know him well enough, if you earn his trust, you might be able to ask a bit about his backstory, which includes the fact that basically he is a transgender man. He transitioned and he lives his life as a man. He is respected as a man. But when he was born, he was assigned female at birth. And that story is laid out, some people would say very sensitively. Some people would argue, why even bother saying it? You know, there are arguments to be had both sides. And it's really powerful because if you look at the image in the middle, you can see that this has become a popular character for trans, non-binary, and gender fluid people to cosplay. Because when you create these characters in games, you give us an opportunity to get to play along, to feel part of the story and to celebrate. You also have the character of Iron Bull. So the big hench lad, the big boy on the right with the horns. You'd expect hyper masculine, super violent, super butch, which is kind of accurate. He's also pansexual, which I really, really like. I like that you can take a character and the way they look is not going to necessarily predict their gender identity or their sexuality. So there is some real positive in those representations. I'm also going to throw in Hollow Knight. This is, again, ridiculous. Why am I talking about the sexual identity and the gender identity of little cartoon bugs? One, because this is an incredible game that I highly recommend. Cannot wait for Silksong. Team Cherry, please give us Silksong soon. I beg of you. But in this game, you are a kind of bug knight that goes off into an underground world of an ancient civilization that's falling apart, mysterious disease. It's a Metroidvania game, and it's great. It also has really cool, subtle queer characters. So the top left there, the little character with the little thing on her head, that's Cloth. So Cloth, first of all, is not depicted as a stereotypical female bug. And you might be laughing here, but we've all seen, like, you know, animals and creatures and monsters depicted with like massive boobs and skinny waists, just so you know that they're a woman, but not Cloth. She's hench and she has a big club and she wants to go fighting and she wants to die in battle. And she also has a girlfriend called Nola, which I really loved. And she's not the only example of a queer female character. There is the Grey Mourner. So that weird little kind of looks a little bit like basically like the bottom part of a broom, but I think she's meant to be either a cockroach or a silverfish. And she sends you on the quest to leave a flower at the grave of her deceased girlfriend, who is a praying mantis. And there's also a really cute story where you meet these like nail smiths and these nail artists. So they help you. Your sword is called a nail, and they help you learn new skills and get a stronger sword. And if you do certain things, two of them, who are both male, end up together, and one of them becomes the muse for the other one. He's painting him. And if you do this, the achievement that gets unlocked is called the happy couple. So clearly, again, explicitly saying that these are two male characters that are now in a relationship together, which is so cute. You didn't have to do that, but you did. And then the character of the knight is explicitly said the knight does not have a gender. You will often hear the knight being called he, because we tend to fall on he pronouns when we're in doubt, but they actually have no gender. They are a vessel. They are hollow. There is another character called Hornet, who is known as the gendered child, because she, unlike your character, the knight, has a gender. And again, so there's a nice bit of representation of a genderless, non-binary, gender fluid character. And you might think that is ridiculous, me reading into bugs, but hey, it made me smile. It didn't break the narrative. It didn't get in the way of the game. It was just there naturally and beautifully, and was really cool. Right, 2020. So we did The Last of Us. We're now on to The Last of Us 2, Part 2. This game came out last year. Really mixed reviews, loads of different things to talk about here. Do you know, personally, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great game. I played it once and I never want to play it again. I found it one of the most emotionally taxing games I've ever played in my life. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but it was heavy. It put me through the ringer. It was bleak and hard. But I still think there was some really cool stuff in there. Let's start just by moving away from the controversy around this game, just talk about the characters that we have in here. So on the right, we have the character of Lev. So Lev is a character that you meet. He is part of this kind of weird cult that is formed during the apocalypse, very hyper-religious. They kind of don't have any technology. He uses a bow and arrow. He's a really cool fighter. You slowly, with one of the characters, Abby, form a bond that's kind of like sort of, I don't know, mother-son, like you start to nurture and look after him. But it's also revealed in some of the back dialogue by some of the other characters who did name Lev. It is revealed subtly that Lev is also transgender. They are a transgender man and were assigned female at birth. Now, some trans people have actually criticized this, saying, you know, why did it need to be revealed? Like, why do we have to have the dead naming? Why does it always have to be a tragic story? This is an apocalypse. Why are we worrying about people's gender? At the same time, other people have argued this is really powerful representation. Lev is voiced by a trans man, and he's a really cool character. I loved him. I cared about him, and you don't always see much of that in games. We also have the character of we have the character of Ellie from the previous game. She's grown up a bit more. We start seeing her actually have more on-screen relationships, particularly with the character of Dinah, who is a really cool character, a bisexual woman who is pregnant. So you have these really interesting queer relationships playing out. And so whether you love the game or not, the representation was powerful. We can use the word powerful, I think. I also want to call out the character of Abby. So Abby is the other character you play with, and she is the top left character. She is like super butch, like she's got really big arms, she's hench, and she's really good. Like I really hated her at the start because you're sort of led to want to follow Ellie, and then the story throws you a curveball, which some people love and some people hate, and you end up associating with the character you thought was the enemy. Anyway, Abby, because she has this non-traditional body type for a woman, she's not queer. You actually see her, the one sexual relationship she has is with another man. But because she's occupying this space, people definitely had a response to her. As soon as they saw her character design, there was a visceral response that was very much tied up into the responses people were having to the queer storylines that had been announced by Naughty Dog when producing this game. So we will be reflecting on this a bit more. But lastly, I do want to call out the BAFTA, British Academy Game Award of the Year, which I got to help announce, which I was really excited to do. So this game came out last year, 2020, Hades. Now, I like this because I'm a historian, and this game is set in ancient Greece, the world of ancient Greece mythology. And it does it justice because I've studied mythology, and Greek mythology is very queer. There's all kinds of relationships happening. So the bottom left, you've got the example of like Achilles and Patroclus, two men who have a very intimate romantic relationship. The character you play, Zagreus, on the right there, he's clearly bisexual or pansexual because you can initiate romances with people of different genders. And then I really like the depiction of the character of Orpheus and Eurydice. So Eurydice is a tree nymph, and Orpheus is there plucking away at his lyre. And Orpheus is depicted in this really cool sort of gender fluid way. The way he's voiced and acted is really nice. It's not clear what gender they're falling on. And I really like that. Even though he uses he, him pronouns, there's room for interpretation, which I thought was really cool. And it was handled really, really well. So we're now coming on to the next bit of the story. I'm using a quote from Zelda again. It's dangerous to go alone, the original bit. We're going to be talking about some of the negative stuff, some of the backlash. I'm a gamer. I play games. I'm open about it. It's not always the easiest space to occupy. So we're going to go back to the story of The Last of Us with the very original game with Ellie. Now, let's remember that Ellie says that she's gay. Ellie, the game designers, have said that she's gay. Ellie kisses girls. Everything about Ellie is gay. And yet, even though that is the case, a small minority, particularly of male, cis, straight gamers, could not accept this, saying that they thought the kiss that happened between her and Riley was just an experimental game, like, I don't know, a bloody Katy Perry song, or someone outwardly saying, Ellie is not gay. I do not care what Naughty Dog, these are the people that made the game. I do not care what they say. She is not a lesbian. She's not gay. And that the platonic relationship she has with a male character is actually more meaningful than the relationship with Riley. There's a lot of denial going on here. There's a lot of uncomfortableness with these kind of characters occupying this kind of space in gaming. This is a minority. Hey, most straight, cis players were really cool with this and loved this game. But it is worth saying that there is a vocal minority. And then we come to The Last of Us Part 2. Now, you do not have to love this game. There's stuff you can criticize it for. I didn't like the sneaky stuff. I got a bit bored of it. I thought even though the graphics were amazing, I thought it was a bit old school. I thought it was a little bit like, you were being led down a path. Those are my criticisms of the game. But when the game was coming out, before it was released, there were certain things that were leaked. For example, that transgender character and the images of Abby, this muscular looking woman. And many people presumed that Abby was going to be the trans character, a presumption which actually was wrong. And so this game was review bombed. So before it was released, people reviewed this game, giving it the lowest possible score before they could actually play it. So the game Last of Us Part 2 has a 95 on its Metascore, its critic reviews, and it has a 3.4 user score. The discrepancy there is huge. It does happen, critics don't know everything, and people often do disagree with critics, but this is quite rare, particularly for such a large, must-play game, such a game that was revealed with such fanfare. Now, there are some people who will argue that what they didn't like was not what I'm talking about. And I'm going to make a controversial statement and say, I still think the largest majority of the backlash against this game was somehow related to representation, whether that was queerness or race or gender. People, or some people, did not like how that was done. And so that is an interesting space to occupy. So let's talk about some of the representations that suck, right? Because we've done some good, bad, and the ugly. And this is just some really bad stuff. These are in some of the games that I adore, by the way. I love these games. I love Resident Evil. I love Persona. I love Zelda. But you have to critique it when it's bad. If you love something, if you really love something, you're also able to see what doesn't work. So Resident Evil, we have the classic trope of, a trans kind of cross-dressing character who does it because they're psychotic. It's like Psycho, right? We have, again, this is a bit of a trigger warning, but we have games produced by the alt-right which encourage you to actively shoot up a gay queer pride parade. Also explicitly depicted as being naked men walking in a sexually suggestive fashion, equating us to rapists and pedophiles. In Zelda, the Breath of the Wild, the most recent game, they sort of had a queer character. So the character where you basically walk up to him and if you take all your clothes off, he says you're perky. It's just a bit lame, isn't it? And then there's the character who is dressed as the group called the Gerudo, who are all female. And you come across a character who offers to sell you a Gerudo outfit. And then their little mask kind of blows up. And the joke is clearly that this character, who could be written as non-binary or trans, has facial hair. And so it's a comedic reveal. It's a comedic moment, when they could have just had a really cool trans character. But no, didn't quite do it. Persona 4, it was really creepy when there's a scene with two gay men who basically like attack and attempt to molest one of the characters and try to force him into drag. And this is an underage boy who's at school. I mean, there's a lot of creepy stuff going on in Persona, but this was one of the things that as a gay man jumped out to me. Also, the way they dressed. Who dresses like that? Insane. And it's a shame, because I think there is an opportunity in Persona where they have got some characters who are pushing the boundaries a little bit. But again, we've got to remember that understandings of gender and sexual identity around the world, in Japan, there are different kind of parallel struggles. So moving on to another thing to touch on is the whole idea of queer coding. This is a complex one. You remember I was talking about how some stories or characters cannot be great, but we still, as a queer community, love them. So one of the examples of this is Girahim. Now, Girahim is queer coded. And what I mean by that is at no point does Girahim say, hey, I am an asexual man, or hey, I'm non-binary or demisexual or queer. But the way he is drawn and characterized, with the asymmetrical haircut, the one earring, the slightly feminine clothes, the makeup, the way he licks a sword suggestively and comes on to the main character of Link, they are clearly suggesting that he is a sexual character. And this has kind of been going all the way back to film. Back in the 50s, there was something called the Hays Code, which meant that if you were going to represent LGBTQ plus people, you could never do it in a positive way because they didn't want to encourage it amongst people. So for many years, Hollywood could only show LGBTQ plus people if they were the villains or the monsters. Why do you think vampires are so camp in old films? Why are all the evil Bond villains a little bit fey or suggestive? That's one of the reasons why, and it still carries through to video games. And we also have Bayonetta. Bayonetta is not queer. She doesn't say that she's queer, but the way that she's draws across BDSM dress and kink, the way she is eroticized, some of her movements, her interactions with other female characters, it is suggested, it is wrapped up in there. So these characters, whilst they are not ever explicitly said to be queer, they are very popular with queer community. It's kind of like we've gone and looked at them and gone, you tried. I see what you're doing there, but hey, we love them. We're going to take them in because there's not often all that I can reach to. So that is worth bearing in mind. So I'm going to briefly touch on it. I'm going to say the G word, which isn't gay. It's Gamergate and the surrounds. I know that this is a point of huge controversy in the community. But it is worth saying that while some of this has died down, the likes of The Last of Us 2 have showed that there is still friction, right? There is still friction within the community. Who gets to play games? Who gets to be in games? Who is being represented and who is being pushed away? The argument rages on. Things that are worth saying are that huge game companies still receive a lot of hate mail every time they try to introduce a queer character into their game. It is worth saying that the YouTube videos, people who are content creators, who are queer, who talk about representation like I am right now, who are on YouTube particularly, they get doxxed and attacked and harassed and, really nasty stuff gets said about them. There are whole areas of the internet where, people are kind of ready to attack anyone that says anything negative about how video games are or tries to change them in any way. Comments below, people who receive these, the likes of Anita Sarkeesian, who created Feminist Frequency, but also Caroline Petit, who's in the video talking about trans and feminist representations. You still get a lot of flack. Many of them end up having to delete their accounts and pull away from social media entirely. And then looking at game development, like people are still writing in game development forums, will the inclusion of LGBT characters in my game detract from possible sales? Which is really sad to see. I want to jump onto this quote, though, that I found. This is just one quote, because I want to say that I actually think mostly gamers are really great people. We're a really cool, diverse bunch. Most of the cis, straight, white male gamers I meet are wicked, but a small minority, they have some issues with us. And someone wrote, people should make the art that they come up with. If LGBT people want LGBT games, they should learn how to make games and make one. So we're not going to make them for you. You've got to make your own games. Guess what? We will. We do. Queer people make games. We don't just play them and we don't just appear in them. So another nerdy game quote, all your base belong to us. We are now taking back our space in the video game industry. Space Invaders, right? So we do make games and we make all kinds of games. And this is called Dream Daddy, a dating simulator. In this game, you can choose your gender identity background. You can have any body type. You can mix match stuff. I want to read a quote from Avery Delaney, who is a critic, a trans critic within video games. I rarely saw trans characters in games, let alone ever had the option to be a gay trans dad who had given birth to his daughter. Such representation, especially positive representation, was groundbreaking and proved how easy it could be for developers to include trans characters in their games. Dream Daddy isn't about being queer, it's about dating hot daddies, but it has space in there for us, which is really cool. And there's all these games that are coming out, right? So I want to call out a few examples, like Dysphoria. So that's DYS with the number 4 IA. That's in the top left corner. So it uses those old school arcade graphics to basically tell the story of a trans woman's transition. You play all these little mini games to go through the story. The game Gone Home, which won loads of awards, which feels a bit like an escape room, which is kind of why I like it. And for ages, I was playing it. My husband downloaded it, didn't tell me that it was actually a queer story. He told me it was a horror game. So I was like creeping around the corner, expecting a giant monster to jump at me. And then found out that, well, I won't spoil it for you, but you'll see. Then there's like the likes of Life is Strange, exploring kind of teen romances through sci-fi and time travel. You've got games like Limb, bottom left-hand corner, like really art house. In this game, you play a square that changes color to match other squares. And if you don't match, you basically get attacked by them. It's all about fitting in and passing in this really abstract maze-like world. My ex-boyfriend, the Space Tyrant, right? We make stupid games too because we like to play games. We want to play stupid games. We don't always want to play highbrow games. Sometimes we just want to like date a boyfriend with great abs from outer space. Like, why not? We also make suggestive games. So the game that you see there is called The Tea Room. It's basically about being a gay man and hooking up in a bathroom. We make games that I think would make a few cis heterosexual players uncomfortable, because we're not necessarily always making games for them. We're also making games for ourselves and to explore and understand our own identities and pasts. So I also want to call out a few examples. There are so many amazing queer people who play games, like queer gamers, right? And there are people that make games. But I'm just going to give a few examples. Jeb Havens from Maxis, because we talked about The Sims earlier. Anna Anthropy, again, trans game developers. Robert Yang, he made the Tea Room. He's an artist. His games are pretty saucy and suggestive and kind of really good fun as well. We've got the likes of, if you ever watch Black Mirror, there's the whole episode, The Fighting Vipers, where two seemingly cisgender heterosexual men get to play with gender and sexuality through a virtual reality game. You've got the likes of gamers. Hey, because I'm talking through their platform here, I could give them a shout out too. And it's nice to see that they've been supported by Nintendo. But people meet, play games, to talk about games, to be queer and play games. And then we also have D&D. Just before doing this talk, I was DMing my Dungeons and Dragons campaign with a group of friends over Zoom. If you like that kind of stuff, Join the Party is an example of a Dungeons and Dragons podcast that's really queer positive. And there are loads of examples of queer people making tabletop games. So it's really cool to see our space slowly being, made room at the table. We don't want to kick you off the table. We just want a chair there as well. And we don't always want to play queer games. Sometimes I'd like to play a cis het massive burly dude. Sometimes I don't. And I want to call out also some of the content creators, like the likes of Sonic Fox and ContraPoints, aka Natalie Wynn, drag queens and drag performers such as Kimchi, all of whom are consuming, being inspired by, looking at video games through like a queer perspective and having fun with it, which I really love to see. So we're coming close to the end of my talk now. And this is where we come to the expansion pack. So expansion pack being the bit of the game that you pay a bit of money, maybe some downloadable content, some DLC, because you want some more stuff, you want some more skins, some more levels. Here's what I'd like to see going forward. A mainstream queer protagonist. Now, we have Ellie, and there are a few others I know, but I'd like to see more. Just, it doesn't have to be about the game being queer just because the main character is queer. Representations of queer people of color. Most of the examples I've shown you, not all of them, but most of them are of white people, right? Largely white men and women. Non-binary and gender non-conforming characters. We've got a lot of binary trans representation. I say a lot. We have more than we used to. But I'd like to see us playing around with that a bit. And asexuality, right? Let's explore that in characters, not just as a character being, frigid. Can we stop relying on the tragic queer narrative? Like, if it is the end of the world, if you were in a spaceship and you're about to crash into a black hole, are you going to be arguing about pronouns? Because really, I just hope that in the future, in the fantasy world, when we're fighting for our lives, we're not going to be having arguments about whether it's cool to be gay. Come on. More consultation with queer communities. We can make better games if we work together. If you want a queer character in your game, wicked cool. Talk to some queer people. Talk to a lot of queer people. And we can help make it good and positive so that you don't end up in some bugger like me on a talk criticizing your game in 20 years' time. Nintendo, my last point. I love you. I love Nintendo games. Nintendo 64 was pretty much the heyday of my gaming experience. Please, can we just do a bit better? Because family-friendly games does not mean that you need to exclude queer people. Hey, I'm a gay man. I have a son. I'm part of a queer family. Families are queer. Kids are queer. Let's make some room for it. And so, without further ado, I'm going to jump out of my presentation and hopefully we've got some questions.
Hello. I'm not a question, I'm the host. Sacha, thank you so much. Can we get some claps in the chat for Sacha? That was an absolutely amazing talk. It is Q&A time. So I have a few questions already. We've had some good comments coming in. Somebody's actually texted me a question, so they've broken the rules of this, but never mind. And we'll get to that in just a second. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat now. We're going to take a short 90-second little ad break. We'll see you on the other side with some Q&A. Wonderful. So, for the subscribers amongst you, you're still watching this stream. You can still see us. Thank you so much for subscribing to the Gayming Magazine Twitch channel. We are ahead of sort of time, so we're killing time. So we've got 1 minute and 15 seconds. There was a few games that were called out as being missed off your list, Sasha. So I thought I'd quickly. I thought for the sake of a minute of being here, I thought I'd quickly share them with you. Dragon Age was a notable omission.
I did Dragon Age. I did one of the Dragon Ages.
Oh, okay, one of the Dragon Ages.
Yeah.
There was a Dragon Age 2. The fact that everyone's bi. You have to buy a DLC to be hetero, which I think is hilarious. Of course, you did. Is Dorian? Yes. Mass Effect was brought up as a sort of strong omission.
Yeah, I chose not to include Mass Effect. So one of the reasons is I have played it, but I have never played a Mass Effect game all the way through, and I felt like that would be insincere me talking about it. But one of the issues I have with Mass Effect is it's got better over time, but the earlier ones, the representation is, I would argue is Now there are a few, but they're still significantly less than heterosexual parents.
And you mentioned Gone Home, so that was forgiven. And Fallout 3 was mentioned as well.
Okay, valid. Yeah, and I love it. Like, celebrate these in the chat, because there's no way I could do every single one, and I'm certain there are some blinders, probably some great indie games that I've missed out. There's some really cool stuff. I wish I could just play games forever. I wish that is all I had to do.
Welcome back from the ad break. We've just been sat here talking about some of the games that were raised in the chat about that Sasha had missed out. We were talking specifically around Dragon Age 2, the fact that everyone is bi. You have to buy a DLC to be hetero, which I think is fantastic. More of that, please. Mass Effect, which Sasha sort of deliberately left out because I had sort of mixed results to start off with. And Fallout 3 was mentioned specifically with Ganon. I'm, of course, obviously, people that know me really well, I'm going to fly the flag for Borderlands as well. The entire Borderlands series is one of the most diverse and truly authentic ways of portraying LGBT people. Let's dive into some questions. So Fang UK, this is more of a technical question rather than an in-depth question. You mentioned at the top of your talk around the sexualized characters, and you said John of Finland. That's Tom of Finland.
Tom of Finland. Oh my god. Is this just going to be a list of every time?
No. It's just, that's it. Honestly, it's just that one. It's just, I thought we'd just start. We'll just start that with a
John of Finland. It's Tom's cousin, John.
Yeah, exactly, John. Yeah, the lesser, the brother that he stole the artwork off and ran off and created his own brand. Honestly, I just wanted to check because I thought I'd missed something as well. No, while you were talking, I was Googling away going, who the fuck is John of Finland?
He's nobody.
Actually, no, he was a duke, but that's probably not related to gay pornography.
Might have been queer, don't know.
Might have been, who knows? First proper question is from Matt on text, because we are now a radio station. Does queer fandom of characters like Bayonetta echo the tendency, particularly for gay men, to obsess over divas such as Cher and Diana Ross?
I really think it does, because personally, I never had the diva fixation. Like, I get it. When there's certain like powerful female characters, I guess Bette Midler is the closest I can get. But because I played a lot of games, I always loved a really powerful female protagonist in a game. So I liked it, for example, in the Zelda series, when we start to see a bit more bite to Zelda. When, as a princess, we start to see her pulling her own weight. My favorite being Wind Waker, where she has her pirate persona, and she's like really rude to Link, and she's got like the little wink that she does all the time. Like, that was great, and I fully stand that all the way. So I think if you're a gamer and you're a nerd and that's your sphere, those kind of characters, because we often haven't had many explicitly queer characters in our childhood, we latch on to instead. Definitely, I would say.
Of course, the other big one under there is Lara Croft as well. For exactly the same reasons.
Good old pointy boobs.
Yeah, exactly. I think the fact that sort of the heterosexual boys were just there for the tits, and I think that the homosexual boys were there because they actually probably wanted to be Lara at some point in their life. But
I mean, why do you think I work in museums? It was a combination, like Indiana Jones and Lara Croft were like my parents, basically. So
love it. Nintendo Mad 888 in the chat. I have a question. What are your thoughts around the player sexual trend in games?
I think I know who this person is. That's fun. So when you say the player sexual, can you say
Actually,
that
I
again?
think I do as well. What are your thoughts around the player sexual trend in games?
The player sexual trend. The fact that I don't know what the player sexual trend is tells you a lot.
Nintendo Mad, if you're watching this now still, and you've obviously figured out that we know who you are, could you drop a bit of context into this chat? Just jump over to another question and we'll come back to that one. I've got a question, actually. You sort of touched on it at the end a little bit in terms of where your personal challenges were to the companies, but we'd learn so much about what we're going to do going forward from looking back at history. So looking back at the kind of track that we've traveled down, where do you see the next sort of few years going in terms of LGBTQ representation?
Call me an optimist. I think we're gonna do gangbusters
Mm.
because video games are so young. Oh my god, we are young. Like video games have been around 40 years.
Yeah.
It's questionable. If you look at painting as an art form, literature, music, and they are not necessarily more progressive and better than video games. Video games are teenagers. Like as video games, we're still going through like the spotty adolescent phase, where we don't want to leave the room and it smells like farts. Yet, despite that, there are still some really great examples. So the stuff that I see is worrying and concerning to me, and particularly because some people's lives are being wrecked by this. So I want to take it seriously, but I also, as an optimist, want to see it as teething problems. So I see it as growing up fast, having to grow up really fast. So I think in years to come, that we are going to be doing really, really well. And I think we're going to be seeing some amazing games coming out. And I just don't think we're going to be having this conversation. You won't need someone like me to talk about it because queer history will be within the history of video games, and queer gaming will just be gaming because games, you don't need to, it's not like if you're queer, you play the queer games and then everyone else plays the other games. We're seeing those mixed together. So yeah, that's how I feel.
I completely echo all of that. I mean, we actually, obviously, this for people that follow Gayming Magazine, we had our first gaming awards this year, and it was absolutely fantastic to be able to reward a lot of the people that you actually mentioned in the last bit of your talk. Obviously, Hades you mentioned as the BAFTA Game of the Year. It's the Gaming Awards Game of the Year as well, and also Robert Yang is our gaming icon for this year, and I think having that kind of, it's telling such a great story. I mean, obviously Tell Me Why coming out last year as being the first sort of major game to have a properly trans protagonist was just a fantastic step forward. So yeah, I echo everything you said. Let's get back to player sexual. So Nintendo, Vanit, has explained that this is the trend where characters' identity is solely based on what you do as a character, and otherwise their sexuality is unknown.
Okay, so I'm guessing, and apologies for me if I'm misreading your question, that kind of idea of like that it's basically sexuality kind of comes down to, do you romance the man and you're a man, or do you romance the woman and you're a woman and therefore you're gay, rather than it being like fleshed out beyond that. I think there's a really interesting thing to be said there, because you've got two sides to it. I would hate for there to be a queer character whose character was just, hi, I'm the queer character. I'm here to be queer, and I'm queer, and my story is about me being queer. Did you realize I was queer? Because then you're like, this is weak. Like, no real queer person is like that. But we are also informed by our gender and sexual identity. And it's I think through consulting and talking with real queer people, you understand how that actually works. One of the classic things I think is funny, I see this in films and I see it in video games. And I think this also applies across to race as well. But with queer people, we have a lot of queer friends. Like, I have loads of straight friends, but the majority of my friends, that I talk to are somewhere within the queer spectrum. But in games and films, you often see there is a straight, heterosexual, cisgender group, and they have the one queer friend who doesn't seem to know any other queer people other than like their partner. And it's like just understanding that can be the case, but that isn't the norm. And so things like that are interesting. The subtleties, there are some real subtleties to doing a good queer character. And, I don't envy game developers, but hey, we've been telling all kinds of challenging stories. We've been telling stories about, demons taking over Mars. Like, surely we can handle the reality of queer people.
And as you said as well, the key thing about consulting, if you do not have the staff on your team to help you, get out there and go and talk to people and get people in like yourself or whoever else to sort of consult on that. One quick question, thoughts on asexual representation in games? I feel like Parvati in Outer Worlds was amazing, but can't think of much representation before. Here's to hoping there'll be even more amazing representation.
Yeah, I think there's again, I've played a lot of Hades. I have defeated it, but I haven't done every single romance option. I believe there is an interaction in that game which implies a character's asexuality, which is really cool. The issue that, again, I'm not asexual, so apologies if I'm not hitting the nail on the head. But what you often get is a character that doesn't want to have sex. That's not an asexual person necessarily. That's just a one-off character rejecting a sexual interaction. Again, the identity of being asexual is both more and less than that. It's more complex than that. And of course, there's many different kinds of asexuality that exist. So it has to be explicit enough that it isn't just a character that won't sleep with you. That doesn't count as asexual. But also, you don't want it to be the be-all of this character's identity as well. And I can't think of other than, Parvati, I can't think of many examples. If I've missed anyone out, again, chuck them in the chat. But I can't think of any.
No, me neither. I'm just really happy that what we saw at E3 was a return of The Outer Worlds 2 sidebar with one of the best trailers at E3. Another question, as you also work with queer kids on many of your projects, have you got an insight on how they are perceiving the general lack of queer characters in video games?
So I work a lot with teenagers specifically. They are just teenagers in general, irrespective of queerness. They're wicked. I love working with them, and they are so. Today's generation of teenagers are more sarcastic and like they know irony better than any generation that came before them. I know teenagers are known for the eye roll, but seriously, the eye roll is like huge. And so that's a lot of the response. It's just like oh, come on. Like I could write a better character in my sleep. Wait till I grow up and I'm going to go and do it better. That's one of the things that I see. There's also a sort of like a joy in just like taking characters that aren't explicitly queer and just being like, Princess Peach is gay. Just like, I'm going to say it. This character is trans now. Donkey Kong is trans. And like the humor and the playfulness with that, I think is wonderful. I do think it comes from a place of frustration and loss. That we wouldn't have to do this. We wouldn't have to play these games if the representation was there. And again, I do get the impression that there are younger queer people who are not yet talking about their identity comfortably, who are very online, who are playing video games online with massive audiences. And, I don't play online gaming because I don't want to be called a slur by a 13-year-old from Texas. I just don't want that. Yes. And so I can imagine, what if I was a 13-year-old? What if my username and my voice gave away something about my identity? What if I just had to hide and hold that back the whole time I'm playing whatever game online? Yeah, it's just an extension of the playground, except it's not police, there are no teachers, and it's universal. So yeah, there's a light side. I feel very positive about the way teenagers handle this, young people handle this, but I also, I feel bad for them. They deserve better. We deserve better. Absolutely.
I think that's it, unless there's no sort of last minute Q&A that's going to quickly drop into the chat. No, we'll call that a day. Sacha, thank you so much for joining us. It was a fantastically enlightening talk. Please, everyone, go and follow Sacha. It's at Sacha_Coward.
That's me. Apologies for all the nonsense. And thank you so much for spending, if you're in the UK time zone, evening, or wherever you are in the world, thank you for coming. That was super fun.
Excellent. This has been part of our DigiPride celebration. DigiPride is a 3-month celebration on Gayming Magazine. You can go and check out everything we're up to at gaymingmag.com/DigiPride. If you want to keep talking to us, we have a fantastically active Discord. You can head over to gaymingmag.com/Discord to join the Discord. And of course, please keep reading gaymingmag.com, the world's only LGBTQ video game magazine. We will see you all very soon. We've got some more exciting stuff coming up at the end of July. We've got a fantastic panel with the Stream Queens. Until then, thank you so much and have a great time. Take care. Bye-bye.